Oh, hey! You caught me off guard in this conveniently contrived introductory to today's video subject. Do you remember when right-wing grifters talked about that one weird tabloid headline about a school that allegedly wanted to put cat litter boxes in their toilets because some kids apparently said they identify as a cat? How it was part of today's larger topic of identifying as being a progressive coat of paint over delusional and other ridiculous claims? You do? Good, because today's topic is about Otherkin. So strap in and put on your fake cat ears because this is going to be one heck of a ride. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be with you in just a moment. Roll the intro! Introduction. The fuck are we even talking about? The thing about that litter box story, though, is that it's completely made up. It's fake news. The reason this story got any traction at all is because of the transgender panic we've been experiencing in Western media for the past few years. And let's not get it twisted, right-wing media was all over this. From libs of TikTok to Joe Rogan to well-established far-right Christian talking heads and Republicans, they all jumped on this bandwagon just so they could contribute to this dumb slippery slope fallacy of,
if we allow kids to identify as any gender they want, what's stopping them from identifying as animals next?
And to make sure that nobody gets to accuse us of straw manning, here's just a random tweet of a random transphobe making exactly this argument. What exactly are you gonna claim anyone is gaslighting anyone else about when we coined a word to be the opposite of transgender? Like it's allistic pushing the autism ideology? Is autism a social contagion? What about me being gay? Or are you gonna catch gay from me?
A man who thinks he's a woman is just as mentally ill as a man who thinks he's a dog or a cat. It seems you have the unfortunate status of believing both of those things. I have disappointing news for you. A festering surgical wound is not a vagina.
Gee, I'm so glad we have someone who's tried so many different vaginas and knows the difference between organic and conventionally grown. Besides the obvious ableism on display here, this is also yet another example of how much of these transphobic attitudes are fueled by a disgust of trans bodies and those who differ from the cis norm. Basically, they're arguing that the slippery slope leads straight to the zoo, which is false. It leads to investigating each moral proposition based on its own specific merits and flaws, such as reinforcing that certain things are bad not just because they are bad, but because they can be analyzed as causing demonstrable harm.
If we allow surgery, then we're allowing murder by all cutting implements.
No, because surgery can be studied and regulated, and when practiced properly, creates demonstrable positives. Murder, on the other hand, is harm. The general sense of what counts as murder is killing someone, maliciously or by negligence, who was not a danger to anyone around them. Like, we basically wrap the definition around the unethical part so that killing in self-defense isn't seen as morally equivalent to putting a bullet in someone who was minding their own business. Even in this painfully contrived example, we're able to suss out the ethical considerations of each situation on their own situational aspects and motives. The argument basically boils down to,
if society changes, then society collapses into chaos. We must make our stand on this very specific issue so that we don't have to examine any of our other assumptions about ethics anywhere else. If we can't define females, then we can't...
Yeah, dog, just like how there were no laws until featherless biped happened.
Now we can start making laws! Behold, a man! They were serving Kentucky Fried citizens!
Get real, doofuses.
If we redefine marriage, the bedrock of society... If we redefine woman...
Yet, the far right ate that shit up, because to them it meant having a leg up on the usual trans bad arguments they kept recycling over and over again, and still are. Because guess what? There never was a universal definition of woman, nor marriage, nor does there need to be. Trying to impose one is thought control. Let people define womanhood for themselves as individuals. I promise you will be fine. And manhood and inbyhood as well. Most transphobia works by implying a delusion in a trans person, presupposing that man and woman are tangible material properties. Believing that sex is the sum total of lots of different moving parts, and that these parts can have lots of natural variation and can be modified to various different degrees of practicality and different degrees of impact on a person's quality of life? That's a thought crime. And you should be canceled into oblivion for trying to spread trans ideology. That's how we keep America free. At least, according to fascists. Yeah, I don't buy that logic. Seriously, the same people crying crocodile tears about cancel culture taking away our free speech are trying to eliminate furry. Furry is a thought crime now. First they muzzled our free speech by criminalizing a woo. But we all know how ridiculous right-wing grifters are by now. So how about we focus on the thing that's actually worth discussing? Can people, human beings, identify as non-human animals? And what does that mean in practice? Can this hypothetical bullshit scenario of a litter box in school toilets actually happen when those darn trans-inclusive leftists get their way? The short answer would be, not really. Unless we just want to troll the right-wing grifters, which, to be fair, is quite tempting, to be honest. The long answer requires us to delve deeper into the furthest reaches of online communities. So step inside your DeLorean and set the place and time to Usenet Forum circa 1990. What? You didn't think the history of Otherkin would go back that far? If you're a Zoomer, you might not be aware of this, so I'll go into a short preamble first. Part 1. A brief history of the word Otherkin. It all began in ancient Egypt, where furries played children's card games for... While belief in animalistic spirits and connection to the animal world is not exactly a new phenomenon, we're talking specifically about Otherkin in this video. But just a few animalist traditions include the animal-like deities of ancient Egypt, reincarnation beliefs particularly in southern Asia, pagan and druidic beliefs originating in Europe, and spirit animal traditions in the Americas. So we have a precedent that people frequently like animals enough that they influence our spiritual beliefs, our mythologies, our culture. We're keeping it to Otherkin for now, which, as a collection of people sharing a community label, started with the advent of the public internet. The internet as we use it today hasn't been online for that long, all things considered. And to make things easier, we commonly refer to the modern internet in two phases, Web 1.0 and Web 2.0. Web 1.0 consisted of simple HTML pages displaying mostly text inside your browser. It was mostly used as an information encyclopedia of sorts, and the information being displayed was commonly only edited by the webmaster, which is the person who owns and hosts the website. Most people consider 1993 to be the year that marks the start of Web 1.0.
Did you feel like you were transported to another time? Hey, sure.
When the year 2000 and 2001 arrived, the internet had experienced what is now known as the .com bubble. What this means is that it marked the first time that companies, think Netscape and Yahoo, started rapidly expanding into online spaces because they've since grown aware of the potential that the internet holds for their business ventures. This is more or less when Web 2.0 started to take shape, and Web 2.0 is where we gained all of the funky interactive social media APIs and user-generated content websites we enjoy to this very day. So, what is this Usenet thing I mentioned earlier then? Well, prior to the existence of Web 1.0, there was a network system focused on discussions called Usenet, to which people could register and contribute. This was all text, mind you, no fancy animations or graphics to be found here. Usenet is considered to be the precursor to internet BBS forums we are all familiar with today. Or at least, we used to be familiar with them. I'm old. It's here where we find the humble origins of the Otherkin community, in the form of a board dedicated to folks who identify as elves and those interested in elves or other mythological beings. What started out as a small group of people talking about their favorite fantasy and mythology critters quickly grew into something more personal. From there, the community came to branch off and accept many different forms of kin, which continues to expand to this very day. So while most people seem to intuit, and this was my impression before I did research too, was that it would start with more organic inspiration, as in, real animals and stuff. But Tolkien variety elves were actually among the first to emerge. But other people related to the core vibe, and here we are today. Now, this is usually when the conversation gets a bit spicy, simply because many people can't find it within themselves to accept identities as wild and out there as those of Otherkin. I mean, elves? Werewolves? Dragons? How could you possibly talk about that with a straight face, right? Well, it's pretty simple. You just accept other people's feelings, regardless of if you can directly relate to them or not.
But CritFacts, we know that dragons and werewolves aren't real.
As an atheist myself, I don't see this as inherently any more or less credible a supposition on the metaphysics of the supernatural than any other major religions practiced today. I think that religious individuals should be judged on how they treat others, not how logical someone's spiritual beliefs are to you. I mean, you're telling me a dude knocked up his own mom with himself so he could come to Earth and pay the ransom for the sin he knows we cannot possibly completely avoid. But church and Christianity are still meaningful to many people. While I'm an ex-Christian myself, do you know how much it costs me to not be an asshole about it at my family reunions? $0. If I can do it, so can you. I'll also refrain from being pedantic regarding the words dragon and werewolf in the context of realism, and instead reply to this by stating that social constructs are ours to identify with, and also reconstruct however we wish. Dragons are a very wide concept that appears to various degrees in so many different cultures. Oh hey, throw up a link to the video about this very topic by Overly Sarcastic Productions. And again, just a reminder, despite what far-right ghouls like Matt Walsh would have you believe, Otherkin are not deluded into thinking that they have the physical shape and all that of Puff or Smaug. While most Christians believe that when you die, you become an angel or are otherwise spirited out of your physical body and into the afterlife. Yet we don't often call Christians deluded, asking them if any feathers fell out of their wings last night. Someone's kin is a spiritual belief, not a material delusion. On the topic of not real dragons and not real elves, or whatever, remember those awful Twilight movies? Yeah? When the movies came out, many fans of vampire lore would yell profusely about how the vampires depicted in them were not real vampires, for whatever reason. But truth is, they are vampires, simply because that's what the author chose to call them. The little angels on that greeting card with the big doe eyes and the little harps? Read the lore, scrubs. That's not my idea of a vampire. Is not an argument for what other people can or should call a vampire. I think American cheese is a monstrosity, and that it should not be called cheese. But do I get a vote on the branding of that product? No. I have to live in a world where people, like the voice actor, deny culinary reality. I have to live in a world where people deny culinary reality. And yes, transphobes, this is what you sound like, stomping your feet and crying because other people use words in ways you don't like. Also known as enjoying freedom of speech. Caw-caw. There's no copyright or rules when it comes to these categories, or even what it means to have a spirituality. If you're religious or spiritual yourself, think of the feelings or culture that you associate with your spirituality or religion and ask yourself, should I give that all up because other people think it's silly or that I haven't studied the proper scriptures? Should I abandon the label I use for my beliefs because other denominations or subsets think that I'm doing my beliefs wrong? Wouldn't the respectful and decent thing to do be to let you have your spiritual belief on your own terms? And that perhaps we should all do this for each other? Including you, jerk watching this looking for an excuse to make fun of people you don't like. So when someone says they identify as an animal, what are they trying to tell us exactly? Am I, in fact, a cartoon fox on the internet? As some of you may know, I don't write these videos. I don't even voice any of them. At least I, the person writing the script, am a member of the writing team. And hi, I'm the voice actor being portrayed by the voice actor portraying the writer into the script, which is then fed through VR chat where I, Critical Q Facts, the character, will portray my words with the help of me, the motion capture artist. Take a bow, me. The joke here is that we have multiple overlapping diegeses, which is the plural of diegesis. A diegesis is a contiguous, usually self-contained reality within media, particularly storytelling. The soundtrack of a movie, for instance, is usually not considered to be real to the characters in the story. It is not real to the characters, but it enhances the artistic element of the story being delivered through audio-visual. You are watching this YouTube video, which is the end result of multiple layers of efforts by multiple people, coming together to create a single pattern of data that will be relayed to other computational devices, which will decode that signal into a pattern of lights and visual information that you call a YouTube video. Those are big fancy words for a bunch of people made a video and we parse it knowing that it's fiction but treating it kind of like it's real. A quantum superposition of relating to fictional characters with real empathy. But what if I told you that there's reasonable disagreement on what constitutes reality even among those of us that agree on what is physically real? That we can recognize that other people have the freedom of thought to parse the physical as merely one of multiple real and meaningful diegeses? If it's okay for Christians to believe that Earth and the material universe is just the tutorial level for an eternity in either the good place or challenge mode, then I'm perfectly fine with someone believing that there are other levels of existence or whatever, and they're connected to a dragon or a crocodile on one of them. Spiritual beliefs are not obligated to follow logic and reason. And isn't it interesting that only some spiritual beliefs get this kind of treatment in most avenues of discourse and media, while other beliefs largely get left alone just because they have more adherents? Live and let live, you weirdos. Part 2. Religious bigotry and anti-religious bigotry. Most of the CritFacts team members are some flavor of atheist, so we're not going to speak too much for people with religious beliefs, except to say that anti-theism is in fact a form of bigotry rooted in the desire to control other people's thoughts and feelings. If you're an anti-theist, stop it! Your lack of belief in any gods or supernatural forces is not threatened by other people quietly celebrating their own unique experiences. And even the most die-hard materialist would have to basically be inhuman to deny that there is more to existence than just the molecules that make us up. We have thoughts and feelings, and the universe is big enough that it's plenty reasonable for people to believe that there's something out there that can't be explained by materialistic outlooks only. You're not being rational or smart. You're being an asshole if you want to force people to give up their religious or spiritual beliefs when those people aren't doing anything to you. Grow up. I'd also like to take a moment and point out all of the people, many of whom are religious themselves, who have called it a religion when we, acknowledge the existence of gender identity and claim that asking for our names, pronouns, and identities to be respected like anyone else's, we are trying to force people to play along with our religion.
Fashions will move on. Transness will lose its edginess, and people will find new ways to express themselves. Apart from the AGP men, of course. They'll always be around, unfortunately.
Again, they said the same thing about gay people. Same thing about it being a trend. We can't wait for you to move on from your obsessive transphobia so that we can simply exist.
Of course you exist. You just haven't magically changed sex and you can't compel the rest of us to go along with your gender religion.
On a personal note, nothing will ever be funnier to me than Catholic transphobes reminding atheist trans people that transubstantiation isn't real. That, and Christians telling me that when they go to heaven, they will continue to be male or female. Because even in a perfect afterlife, you are still locked into one of two pathways designed to make small, mobile, biblically correct sperm cells. That, and Christians telling trans people that trans ideology is trying to set helpless victims on a path of regret for the rest of their lives. But also, they literally worship a god who condemns people to eternal hell if they answer wrong in the ultimate guessing game. I've noticed their theology doesn't offer a mechanism for people to detransition out of hell. Huh. I'm allowed to make those jokes. I was raised Christian. I'm also allowed to criticize Christian theology and the practices of Christian supremacy because they tried to make me a collaborator. And I refused to uphold Christian supremacy even while I still believed in God. When it comes to turfism in general, Catholicism has always been a very prominent background of many of the movement's founders and prominent figures. Both Janice Raymond and Mary Daly, who were responsible for writing the infamous Turf Bible titled The Transsexual Empire, used to be devout Catholics. Although they did end up disavowing Christianity, I think it's clear that their Catholic viewpoints live on in their politics and writings. And yes, I am carelessly lumping Catholicism and Christianity together. Y'all both worship the same God, read from the same holy book, just that some of you are so extra you show up a day early for your punch and cookie party. You're all a book club that can't even finish the only book you ever read. But you can find much more on that in a separate video on our channel in which we go over the anti-trans Bible, the Transsexual Empire. Link in the doobly-doo. It is very in-depth and you should actually check it out if you haven't already.
Do it.
Fun fact, later in this very thread, the same transphobe went to use a Nazi hate tactic called the Salient Exemplar Fallacy, which we did a video on. Again, link in the doobly-doo.
Why would it be a reason to bother trans women who aren't either?
What about those who are?
While we're at it, let's go over a few more examples of trans as a religion and therefore bad rhetoric.
Can the gender-critical side of the debate compromise? If so, where?
What's there even to compromise about? I'm not giving up single-sex spaces, not calling men she or women he, not accepting child medication/mutilation, not tolerating men as women's representatives, not going to use the language of the gender religion. Where's the compromise?
So that's a clear no when it comes to compromising. What a surprise, right? More evidence that there's no real point in debating gender criticals, as if we needed any.
It's called a dead name because adopting a trans identity is a ritual of death and rebirth in queer Gnosticism. Technically, it's a crude, external, simulated step towards hermetic ascension to the level of self-begottenness so that one's gender soul might actualize.
If this language regarding the labeling of religion doesn't already sound familiar to you, allow me to clarify for a bit. The classifying of different traditions and norms as a religion to be opposed is fundamentally rooted in imperialism. And this is also the reason why we as progressives are opposed to anti-theism. It's literally the belief that other people need to be converted into being controlled by the dominant sensibilities. The gender religion is the battle cry of the TERF Inquisition, trying to root out trans people and then pretend they're the victims and trans people are the aggressors. Oppressing religious traditions purely because they oppose your own, usually white and cisnormative, customs is a tool of colonialism, and as much as we highly recommend that people stay far away from using such rhetoric, no matter how tempting it might be to scratch that rebellious itch, Many of us have grown up with religious parents or family members, so we understand the temptation to lash out and counter religious fundamentalism, particularly when it's part of a larger political outlook that opposes minorities. Just make sure you keep your views nuanced at all times so as to not alienate those who would receive the short end of the stick, just like you did when you grew up in a fundamentalist household. If you're not careful, you may end up like these GC doofuses on Twitter who have to make phrases like gender religion part of their online vocabulary just so they can scaremonger other predominantly white cisnormative people into hating trans people. That's not to say that being trans is a religion in any real sense of the word, though. It's just that transphobes have to label us as such in order to instill a very clear us versus them mentality in the minds of their peers. A mentality that tells people these people and their identities are different and foreign to us, and therefore we should shun them. In that regard, not that much has changed when it comes to spreading hateful propaganda.
Transgender is trending. Honestly, when did we become so obsessed about people that have existed for years and never bothered us?
Until about 5 years ago when they started demanding rights that are exclusively reserved for the opposite sex, as well as targeting children for indoctrination into the gender religion.
Even things cisgender doctors have imposed on us based on stereotypes are, to these people, evidence that trans people are a religion.
You forgot the most important part. It removes the need for a doctor to be involved and instead makes the only criteria to live as their chosen gender. Can you tell me what it means to live as a man/woman? It's just facilitating gender religion. It's harmful and regressive.
This person just said we shouldn't get to make our own life choices without a doctor agreeing with us, as if doctors do not ever act on prejudices. Except, of course, when the doctor agrees with the trans person, then it's malpractice. It should be obvious by now that these people do not actually care about the medical consensus when they write stuff like this. The only thing they see is a possible roadblock with which to thwart trans people from having our identities acknowledged and validated. They treat transition, even mere social transition, with all the fanatic resentment of die-hard religious zealots punishing someone for blasphemy or heresy, and then claim that they're the daughters of witches that wouldn't burn. The fact that they spend most of their activism on opposing medical experts and doctors should be enough to confirm this. What is equally frustrating is the fact that trans people are no stranger when it comes to people demanding that they have experience with, quote, living as a man/woman. In general, trans people are just as opposed to this requirement as these transphobes object to it in public forums. But when push comes to shove, they use this gatekeeping tactic anyway, even when denouncing it as absurd, all because it's an easy way to sabotage attempts to secure transitional care, as if it was trans people who came up with this requirement in the first place. Not to mention, it blatantly ignores non-binary experiences, and since non-binary people are overwhelmingly supported by the trans community, that makes it even less likely for us to be okay with this.
A huge step in the wrong direction! The gender religion is woman-phobic, homophobic, and children-phobic. Censoring their speech and removing their rights is anachronistic. You have become radicalized if you support the denigration of civilized society for sexually deviant men.
Real women are being phased out. The first step persuading them to deny their own existence is almost complete. Female is real and it's sex, and femininity is unreal and it's gender. Jermaine Greer, also known as a pedophile.
This person is literally citing a known pedophile. She wrote and published an entire book about lusting over prepubescent boys, and brandishing a truly apocalyptic prophecy of a female-free future if we continue to allow the heresy and blasphemy that is wanting to have choice over one's own sexual anatomy. But we all know you're either under covenant with malice or femalis. No human could exist without exactly one of these two. And if we so much as tolerate this gender religion, then society will fall, marriage will become meaningless, people will identify as marrying their cats, and the woke will have eliminated God's chosen people, the aborted fetuses coming down from heaven to wreak vengeance upon... If you're still not convinced that GCs are conservatives wielding the same "we need to protect civilized society" nonsense as every other reactionary, I'm honestly not sure what else to tell you. If you're in any way opposed to fascism or fascistic rhetoric, a group of people actively demonizing minorities for being an affront to civilized society should raise a lot of red flags to you. This isn't criticism, this is a call for legitimizing hate speech. Can we at least agree that this is blatant fear-mongering with no basis in reality? Or, in some cases, deflection from one's own heinous crimes? Because the people trying to push religions down unwilling people's throats, that tends to be the religious group with the most political power in any given setting, and in the USA, UK, and much of Europe and the Americas, that religion is, and historically has been, Christianity. Not because Christianity is good or bad, but because Christian supremacy has enabled shitty individuals to further push for more Christian supremacist momentum, and other kinds of abusive crap that can happen in any religious or ideological group, including atheists. I'm pretty sure if atheists were the dominant group here, we'd be dealing with the same shit, just Mountain Dew and Doritos instead of punch and cookies.
It's wrong, twisted, disgusting, and it's happening in schools every day. The loony left is perverting the minds of children, and these people need to be arrested and thrown into jail for child abuse. Ignoring biological reality should be a crime punishable by incarceration. Conservative Christian and widowed husband of one lovely bride, my pronouns are trans is a lion, Jesus is the Lord.
It's a biological fact that people die when they're crucified and you do not come back from the dead. It's also a biological fact that if you're pumped full of embalming chemicals after exsanguinating all over yourself, your odds of recovery are, very slim. This person is claiming that their view of male and female is literally divine truth and that everyone who rejects that religious tenet should be kidnapped by the state and forced to assimilate. They are advocating for thought crime to be punished with literal incarceration. That thought crime is believing that it's not unethical to be gay or trans. How terrible of us. This same person would go on to post in a god-awful, pun intended, string of replies in my mentions. I kid you not, this dude spent hours arguing about how homosexuality is a violation of the truth and whatever. What truth? Hopefully this serves to illustrate the point I was trying to make earlier about how this all harkens back to Western imperialism and colonialism. Even without the obvious framing of fundamentalist Christianity, this type of narrative does nothing but strengthen the core principles behind colonialism, which boil down to we belong and nobody else does. Here's 2 more tweets by this guy. Get your truth counter ready.
Your joy should be in the truth, my friend, but we know you're too stubborn to accept it. You'd rather fill your body with chemicals that cannot generate to promote the lies and accept the truth. For that I pity you and wish you well, but this is wrong, and I oppose that. Christians tell the truth. Your rejection of the truth does not make the truth hate, but you hate the truth. And to those who hate truth, all truth is hate.
6 truths in 1 tweet. Damn! Truth this, truth that. What even is truth? And does it really bring joy? Can we throw it out if it doesn't? Because my understanding of how reactionaries use truth is basically to say the axiomatic bedrock of my intellectual journey, and they really do not dig very deep. But that's for another episode.
Seeing as how my work revolves around biology, my days here are probably numbered. Follow me on Instagram for updates on everything. Twitter does not equate to the real world, so don't take it to heart. If anything, if you were removed, it will enliven the debate that biological sex, male and female, is truth and well understood by science. I only want to be around truth seekers and truth tellers. Life's way too short to waste time on fakes, phonies, and frauds. I search out the forthright and the fearless as friends because they are the most honorable and genuine.
biological sex is truth. It is science.
Sex is truth and freedom by acknowledging differences and celebrating them. Gender is oppression by ignoring biology, driven by gender cultists who believe personality is our only difference.
Sex is truth.
Sex is truth. Gender is a Marxist social construct.
Part 3. What is truth? With all that boring philosophy and human rights crap out of the way, let's dive into one of the most commonly asked questions from normies regarding Otherkin. Why is it that these people always identify as mythical creatures or animals associated with mysticism and nothing else? See also this bad take I found from a random regressive person on the hellsite.
I can't help but notice with the xenogender crowd that all of the animals they identify as is always something that is generally regarded as cool, cute, or powerful. You see lots of wolf genders and dragon genders, but you never see maggot genders or tapeworm genders. For something that is supposed to be genuine expression of identity, it really comes off as more as a childish pretend game.
I would firstly like to point out that Otherkin identities are not necessarily related to gender. Maybe it is for some, though I honestly don't know anyone who claims to only have an Otherkin gender specifically. And I can confidently state that my list of contacts goes pretty damn deep. That being said, I can certainly see how any sort of personal identity could also be tied to one's gender. Unfortunately, trans people are still the current hot topic of debate among conservative-minded folks. So, I suppose it's only natural that they conflate gender with things like race and non-human animals. That's just how bad faith arguments work, sadly. The argument that Pawsfish here makes is nothing new, honestly. If anything, it's old hat. I remember talking to people with shitty racist opinions on Native American culture who basically made the same argument regarding totem animals, and that was almost 20 years ago. However, since I'm not Native American, and I don't want to speak for them in this regard, I will instead use paganism as a reference from here on out. That's not to say that there is no overlap between Native American spirituality and pagan traditions, but this should at least ensure that we keep our privilege in check to the best of our abilities. For this reason, I will also refrain from referencing to any spiritual animal entities as spirit animals, since this is part of Native American heritage that I, as a white person, don't want to appropriate, and I encourage other white people to do the same. I will use the term power animal instead, which is in line with how these types of entities are labeled within paganism, and honestly sounds kind of metal.
Sorry, white people, you have no spirit animal. That's your persona!
Details aside, let's go over why people throughout history have nearly always identified with a specific set of animals and why animals like dung beetles or tapeworms are usually left out. Because yes, this isn't something new that teenagers on Tumblr come up with after watching Underworld and Van Helsing one too many times. Before I continue, I should explain that I don't usually like to look back on human history like this, since it involves discussing our primitive animal origins that can easily be used to explain or excuse all kinds of nasty things we experience in modern society today. It's the same reason why you should probably never use nature or biology as a justifier in a debate about identity and human rights. If you tell a transphobe that being trans or gay is natural because all types of non-human animals can also be trans or gay, this indeed sounds like a solid argument at face value. However, by going down this route, you now also have to account for how things like rape and murder are somehow not natural, since these also occur in animals naturally. It's a nasty fallacy that you should never want to rely on. What is natural is not always good, and what is good is not always everyone's idea of natural. When it comes to this specific topic, however, there is some value in looking back on human history because it allows us to properly investigate the relations between early humans and different animals, and how they've influenced and shaped our perceptions to this day. That is, unless you think it's purely coincidental that cars traditionally always have 4 wheels, or that an airplane typically closely resembles the shape of a bird, animals of all kinds have been inspiring people since the dawn of time when you think about it. Back in the olden days of hunter-gatherers, people would look to predator animals like wolves or bears because of their revered status as hunters within the animal kingdom. In other words, these animals became symbols that hunters would look up to as a sort of good luck ritual, if you will. A hunter would look to the wolf for its courage, for example, or to a bear for its strength, or a cat for its cunning nature, or the possum's ability to be so brave even though it's literally Tuesday. These are all qualities that we associate with these animals, even to this day. Exaggerated? Arbitrary? Most likely, yeah. But they're still important symbols that we as humans have come to understand and relate to. And that's something you can't underestimate when talking about something so personal. I mean, I can think of a certain fiction author who lots of TERFs love, who included many characters having alternate non-human personas, had communities represented with animals that evoked very specific vibes. Though, with time and as pagan traditions were becoming increasingly more common, they became more than just symbols and instead became a kind of spiritual vibe guide to look up to for a lot of people. This makes sense when you consider that paganism encouraged a healthy kinship with other animals. This was, of course, before Christianity took over and labeled any other beings beside humans as inferior, since Christian philosophy dictates that God basically made humans in his own image, and everything else is kind of made to be our playthings. Like a dog being given a chew toy, if you will. Oh fuck, I've used another animal metaphor. Ugh. Please leave a comment about how the Christian God totally made every being on this planet in his image, including worms and the bacteria living in the dirt. Just one creature more so that others for reasons? But dragons though, that's silly. Another popular misconception is the idea that Otherkin and furries are basically one and the same, which stems from a gross oversimplification of these two communities.
Oh boy, it's the Otherkin/furry discourse again. Left Twitter users on their way to argue about the most pointless things imaginable.
Let's go over the differences between furries and Otherkin, shall we? Furries enjoy anthropomorphic, humanoid, and often colorful cartoon animals as a genre of fiction. Sometimes enjoy dressing up as said cartoon animals called fursuiting. Enjoy media and fiction that contains anthro-animals. Like to make fictional cartoon animal characters called personas to express their creativity and embody different personality quirks. I think most furries would agree with me that most of their personas are definitely based on their own personality, as is often the case when creating fictional characters. However, I don't think they would necessarily say that they identify as that character at all times in the way other kinfolks do. Personas are usually viewed as an outlet of creativity by members of the furry community, which is why many of them are often colorful and eccentric. They're typically more so created for the purpose of doing various storytelling pastimes with other furries, such as tabletop RPGs, VR spaces, text-based chat spaces, art galleries, and for showing off their flashy and expensive fursuit at the next con. That's not to say that some Otherkin are not also furries, or the other way around. But the terms don't mean the same thing, and the difference mostly comes down to a clear spiritual component. And while freedom of religion is typically a conservative's bread and butter, particularly if they're of the evangelical type, they don't seem to want to respect non-Christian religions for some reason. That's why you get so many of them using Otherkin as the punchline for their unfunny attack helicopter joke, such as this clown.
I'm a trans-species Otherkin and demand the NHS provide me with free veterinary services. Anything less is a violation of my trans canine rights and morally equivalent to global genocide, apparently.
Don't let me be the judge of comedic taste, though. This gem of a tweet got exactly 0 likes. Speaks for itself, really. It seems like even the transphobes on this hellsite are getting sick of the same joke over and over. One other thing to mention is that, just like with trans people, Otherkin are often framed as being delusional by bigots. Like a group of people who can't refuse to socialize or communicate like regular human beings. Obviously, there's no real truth to this, and the only reason people rely on this narrative is because they need to rely on poisoning the well before entering a discussion regarding a topic they're clearly ignorant about. To the average conservative mind, there's no need to put energy into learning about a minority of people when you're already dead set on hating them regardless. The simple fact of the matter is that anti-furry sentiment is typically fueled by queer hatred, while anti-Otherkin sentiment is typically fueled by ableism towards autistic and otherwise neurodivergent folks. This is, of course, a gross oversimplification, but it reflects my experience of seeing people react to both movements. Part 4. Religion and Sex. A lot of people take certain experiences for granted. Many Western people, even those who claim to be agnostic or atheist, will on some level identify with, for example, the concept of a Christian heaven or hell from a very young age, simply because that particular view is embedded into Western society by way of Christian teachings. That's not to say everybody necessarily believes these things exist, just that they have been socialized to recognize them conceptually. When we think of a spiritual experience, this is often what shapes their perception of it, minus some personal details, of course. Side note, I find it interesting when Christians call trans people delusional for believing in gendered souls, when every time I ask a cis Christian what kind of body they might have in the afterlife, it's a sexed body that happens to be the same sex as their physical body. So you're telling me there are boy and girl angels, but not sexed souls? Exclaiming yourself to be non-human can be just as much of a political statement as it is a personal one. And just like Satanists don't necessarily believe in an actual Prince of Darkness, but evoke his aesthetic as part of their larger political message of stop trying to control me with your prescriptions of right and wrong, then someone can conceptualize themselves as separate from humanity without believing that their shape has magically changed for it. For some, any kind of deep social connection with humanity as a whole just isn't there.
The more I try to define my sexuality, the less I feel human. Seeing Twitter arguments over what is and is not a lesbian and shit like that just reinforce this fear that I'm being judged and that I'm unwelcome in sapphic spaces. Like, okay, I'm not a woman, I date people that aren't women, I date people that are, I don't know. Like, it's not just online either. I go to queer events and some people are just so not welcoming and I just go home. Lol, sucks.
Shantilly is amazing, by the way. You should check out their everything. Link in the description. This video is now a Shantilly admiration post. Why identify as a human any more or less than primate or mammal? Scientifically, those categories still apply, but I've yet to meet anyone who's proud of their primateness or considers it a meaningful contribution to their sense of self. After all, how can you confidently expect honest and moral individuals to identify with those who want to literally genocide entire subgroups of their supposed own kin out of existence? Biology isn't being questioned here. It's identity. It's the same emotional journey as was overly simplified in Multipass's experience watching all of the horrors that human history has accumulated and wondering, am I supposed to be a part of that? I don't want to dwell on the topic of anti-human sentiments too much. My philosophy is of individual accountability for your ethics, and so I don't feel that being a human person means you're responsible for the atrocities of human history, just for the ones you participate or not in now. But before moving on, I'm going to leave a link in the doobly-doo to an anarchist rant on the topic. It's by a writer named Faun and dates back to 1987. This isn't an endorsement as there are some spicy takes that I'm not gonna touch, but I think that it's good reading if you want to empathize with why someone just doesn't want to categorize themselves in with humanity despite being featherless bipeds and all that. When it comes to most Otherkin beliefs, there is no heaven or hell, no good place nor bad place. In my experience, many Otherkin also consider themselves paganists and share various different religious outlooks with modern paganism or neo-paganism. This includes Wicca and Druidism. It helps to keep in mind that many LGBT+ people are generally more often drawn to neo-paganism beliefs simply due to the fact that their identities are often rejected by Abrahamic religions. And given that nobody really has any idea, I don't think it's really weird to shop for your own spiritual beliefs a la carte or mix and match. But none of that should come as a surprise because...
CritFacts!
What is it now?
What makes being a furry attracted to other furries any different than being a zoophile?
Part 4.5, Sexual Ethics and Animalism. Why is it okay to bang crystal, but not any of the real blue foxes in the wild? Good question. Great question. Hey, I also have a question. Do you like humans? Well, you basically like apes, so why aren't you fucking orangutans? What's wrong? Not a fan of some bonobo pussy? I swear, this argument is one of the most foolish anti-furry arguments I've ever heard, and I'm so tired of it. Like, how is it that you understand that it's okay for Goofy to date Clarabelle, but that it would be super weird for Goofy to make out with Pluto, and yet you have trouble applying the same logic to furries and animals? In addition to how many furries are asexual and not into any kind of lewdness, and those furries who aren't ace, not all of them like to mix furry content and erotic content. Of those that do, there's still the understanding that non-consensual, smelly, stinky animals shan't be fucked. Let me put it this way, furries understand well that if you can't play board games with it, then you can't fuck it! See also the Harkness test. Besides that, how does that have anything to do with the movement as a whole? That's not even mentioning the fact that whenever a zoophile does pop up in either the furry movement or the Otherkin movement, which is rare, they are almost immediately shunned out of the community. Neither furries nor Otherkin have any roles pertaining to sexuality, because they're not clubs you need membership cards for. They're movements that are predominantly active online, and as such can feature any number of people from all walks of life, not to mention trolls. The best thing to do is to shun and distance yourself from any zoophiles that do pop up. Though, let's be honest here, it's not as if many real-life organizations haven't been the subject of far worse sexual controversy and yet are still operating to this day. Looking at you, Catholic Church. The question, this filthy, disgusting argument, has nothing to do with sexual morality or whatever. It's just a tool used by conservatives to divide queer communities and to gatekeep perceptions that don't suit their own traditions. It's not that different from homophobic grifters claiming that boys shouldn't like pink fluffy animals because it would make them gay or something. Oh, and just in case you think that's a silly straw man, this was absolutely what a lot of homophobes used to say back in the day. And it is still weaponized to this day in the form of anti-furry bigotry. Unless you want to believe that cosplaying as bright, colorful, and cute fluffy cartoon animals has nothing to do with your disdain for them, there's a reason why so many bronies back during the rise of the brony fandom were scared of being perceived as gay for liking cutesy, bright-colored cartoon ponies. And to be a little fair, this type of disgust has usually been cultivated within families based on years of pushing conservative principles down their throats. Instead of embracing creativity and a fondness of nature and animals, it's become easier for these people to lash out against it simply because that's how they've grown up themselves. But also, maybe consider that if you're trying to punish people for their sexual fantasies but can't actually point to any harm, as long as all participants are consenting adults, boundaries are respected, why punish people? Doesn't freedom include the right to be a kinky fucker so long as everyone participating is a consenting adult? I suppose sexual freedom doesn't exactly gel well with conservative anti-porn principles and fear-mongering, though. When it comes to the more spiritual aspects of Otherkin people, though, the difference lies in the level of attachment to your character. Do you have a fursona because it allows you to express yourself creatively with a cute animal species that you like? Or does the animal in particular mean something to you on a personal level? As an example, I know people who identify as Otherkin because a friend or a spouse has commonly compared them to a certain kind of animal. This could be because of certain physical traits, but it's almost always due to behavior and ways of thinking that we commonly associate with different animal types. A fox, for example, is commonly associated with being cunning, even though foxes themselves don't have any understanding of concepts like that. At least, I don't think they do. Owls are usually depicted as being wise, even though this trait can be traced back to Greek mythology and the goddess Athene, who was usually depicted with an owl nearby. And possums scream at own ass. These identified traits can then lead to them using said comparisons as a jumping off point for their own spiritual journey. What animal or non-human identity they relate to is completely personal and is up to them to decide. When it comes down to it, Otherkin is an umbrella term used by people who identify as non-human in some form or another. Everything else, including the establishing of this kind of identity, is rather subjective. Hopefully this establishes that there's a lot of layers to this topic, which makes sense when it comes to subjects like identity and religion. It is a lot more complicated than what most right-wingers want you to believe. To them, it's merely a stick to smack people over the head with, because they assume that you have the same discontent towards people with different concepts of identity. They fail to realize that many autistic people, myself included, can also very much relate to feeling isolated from human society. To feel like you don't share the same social goals or the same commonly held interests. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and further alienation from society will only strengthen this observation. Part 5. Delusion or Autonomy. Okay, by now we've covered the religious undertones that can come with Otherkin identities. This isn't to say that this is always the norm. Some people have a power animal identity with no strings attached, and that's fine too. When you think about it, it isn't too different from how certain atheistic Christians don't consider themselves believers of a supernatural God, but still consider the Bible to be an important work of philosophy worth adopting. Thomas Jefferson famously made his own edited version of the Christian Bible by cutting out all of the sections containing supernatural miracles using a razor blade. While I was initially hesitant about bringing this up, I know this is a common argument made against the Otherkin community, which is, why should we encourage a delusion? It is an incredibly loaded question that older trans people should probably be all too familiar with. In the context of furries and Otherkin, it refers to viewing the concept of identifying as an animal or fictional critter to be mentally harmful. Before diving into the meat and potatoes of this argument, I want to at least mention how I find it incredibly ironic that this argument typically comes from right-leaning individuals who aren't exactly well known for supporting healthcare, let alone mental health. If anything, we should all acknowledge how desperate these people are for trying to one-up us with rhetoric they don't even stand for. Whenever this topic of Otherkin and mental health is brought up, it's usually in the form of some type of slippery slope regarding animal abuse. I remember how there was one rather infamous interview doing the rounds on the internet of a teenager who identified as a wolf and who had apparently been physically abusing a dog. This story is very old, so forgive me if I'm not getting all of the details correct. The important part that we should take away from this story is that animal abuse should never be tolerated, and judging from how serious the backlash was to that story at the time, I'd say there was plenty of justified outrage. Was the animal abuse directly tied to his Otherkin identity? Some commenters back then thought it was, and a common argument was to say that the kid was clearly deluded because of him being Otherkin, as if being Otherkin is some kind of gateway drug that leads to animal abuse. Not to mention that Otherkins as a community are not organized in the way many traditional religions are. There's no Otherkin doctrine that tells people to sacrifice animals to appease the dark furry overlord or something. They're just a community of like-minded individuals who identify as a type of animal or non-human being for reasons we've already discussed previously. Remember how reactionaries constantly claim that people identifying as animals will be the next on the LGBT plus rights activism agenda? It's usually a toss-up between claiming that, or people want to marry animals, or claiming that we want to outright support pedophilia next, as if those same reactionaries don't already support pedophilia.
Is pedophilia a sexual orientation? By MC Seto. RB, I prefer the terms erotic sex preference and erotic age preference. Pedophilia is erotic age preference. Homosexuality is erotic sex preference.
In reality, though, we are passionate about freedom of autonomy and identity, which the right side of the political spectrum clearly isn't, considering how even just the thought of people identifying as something they find strange basically keeps them up at night and actively informs their political decisions. However, when it comes down to it, I would absolutely fight for Otherkin to legally identify as non-human, and as long as there is no evidence to show that there's any real harm done by giving others the freedom to identify as non-human animals or beings, you should too. I'll even go a step further and state that I find it ridiculous that so many people are this combative about not allowing people this simple freedom. On that note, I think this makes for a good spot to end the video. I could probably go on for another hour about the intricacies of personal identity and the importance of freedom of self-expression, but I think this essay in its current state is enough of a behemoth to get through as it is. This subject means a lot to me personally, since not only does it touch on the topic of identity as a whole, but I have also made a lot of Otherkin friends over the years, and for some reason, the modern internet has decided that Otherkin and furries are nothing but laughingstock, and I sincerely disagree with that assessment. I've noticed fairly quickly during my time online that a lot of hate faced by Otherkin and furries also applies to the queer community, and I think I've demonstrated pretty conclusively in this video that they are also subject to the same type of anti-queer rhetoric. Please, do let us know what you think about this topic in the comments, though. Have you ever considered the idea of having a non-human identity? What does having a human identity even mean to you, if you have one? If you're one of those people with a passing familiarity on the subject, has this essay shifted your views on it somewhat? I'm curious to read your opinions. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing, and if you really like our content, please consider supporting us financially on Patreon or Ko-fi. CritFacts is a grassroots LGBT+ activism organization, and your support makes it possible for us to invest more time and energy into our activism. A particularly huge shout-out goes to Alan Altman, at Minak, Beth and Weowbot, Lady Emily, and Mademoiselle Emile, and all of the other Patreon supporters whose names you see on the screen now. Before we close out this video, I just want to remind everyone that we will do a huge deep dive into the history of Ray Blanchard and his typology when we reach 5,000 subscribers. You definitely don't want to miss that, so make sure you subscribe and all that good stuff. Tell your friends. With that, I wish you all a great rest of your day. Until next time. And my name is Sarah Saunier, the voice actor for this CritFacts video. You can find me on Twitter and watch me shitpost all throughout my time on there. Enjoy the hellsite! I can't believe we just spent an hour telling people to just not take everything so seriously in their version of reality literally all the goddamn time.